Widget shapeshifted its way onto your NES back in 1992. Developed and published by Atlas, Widget for the NES was based on the Saturday morning cartoon Widget the World Watcher, or just Widget for short. The cartoon mainly focused on a small alien that found his way to Earth to help us dumbass humans with our environmental problems, while also fighting totally evil bad guys intent on destroying our clean air and water. The main gimmick to Widget, besides being a cartoon about saving the environment, was his ability to shapeshift into various forms to solve whatever perilous situation Widget's human friends managed to find themselves in. So I guess you could sort of think of Widget as an early 90s version of the Wonder Twins, just less entertaining. Even though Widget the cartoon series wasn't exactly popular with anyone at the time, most likely due to its overly preachy environmental message that Captain Planet had thoroughly wore out years earlier, it was still worth a chance for Atlas to scoop up the rights and make a Widget video game for the NES. So was Widget a more entertaining game than cartoon series? Or was it just time to tell this alien to shapeshift himself into a clearance bin at the local Blockbuster? Well, grab your favorite planet-friendly free-range NES controller, because we're about to see if Widget is worth saving the planet for. Start up Widget and you're met with a basic start menu, and then it's off to the game itself. The story here mostly mirrors the story of the cartoon, with Widget sent down to Earth to stop a few villains with ridiculously hilarious names from polluting our home planet. Initially, when you first start the game, Widget can only go to the first stage on the map screen, but after defeating that stage, then you can go about selecting the remaining available stages. In the meantime though, just go ahead and select that first one, and let's get to saving the planet, Widget style. As you can probably guess, Widget is your typical NES side-scrolling platform game that you've probably seen a billion times already. It's cute and colorful and filled with enemies to shoot at and platforms to jump across. Besides jumping around like a loon, Widget gets a super crappy version of Mega Man's Buster Gun to take out whatever enemies are in your way. Normally, I welcome any sort of projectile weapon in my platform games, but Widget's gun is one of those that can seemingly only ever shoot one bullet at a time, and won't even think about firing again until the previous bullet either hits the enemy or goes off screen. I've never liked these kinds of guns in games, and it doesn't help that Widget's gun, at least in its starting form, can take ages to get across the screen. So if you happen to miss the target, you'll be waiting a second before you can even shoot at it again. Thankfully, you can find a couple of powers throughout each stage to not only increase the damage of his gun, but also the speed at which it fires to make things a little less annoying. Just be sure not to die, since all of that extra power goes away as soon as you do. Besides jumping and shooting, Widget also brings his cartoon ability to shapeshift into various things into the game with him. At any point during the stage, just press the select button to bring up a list of currently available stuff that you can morph into. While the list is pretty short in the beginning, only giving you a stationary tank to change into, you'll gain more to use for every stage you beat. And thankfully the game does an excellent job at utilizing each form to make your way through the game. While most of the time you'll be using the different forms to find secret rooms that your normal form can't access, you'll also come across sections in each stage that simply aren't accessible until you find whatever thing you need to transform into to get past it. An early example of this is in the second stage, where you come across this expanse of water that you can't get across. The only way to get past this and beat the stage is to use the pterodactyl form, but you don't get that form until you beat the third stage. So even though you can select whatever stage you want to play, you may not actually be able to beat it until you figure out which form you need and where to get it. It's a refreshing change of pace from your typical NES platformer, and the game even encourages you to go back to previous stages to find power-ups that you couldn't reach before using your newfound abilities. It's a really neat touch, and would actually make Widget a decently fun game, if it wasn't for the fact that playing the game is mostly maddening. While Widget's overall premise is fairly unique for a mascot platform game based on a kid's cartoon show, the rest of the game mostly falls flat. First off, Widget controls incredibly stiff, making his movement and jumping never feel like you've quite got a handle on him. It doesn't help that most of the game is filled with leaps of faith that make Widget use every inch of his jump to make it across, or he'll be tumbling into yet another bottomless abyss below. The game's enemies also don't help anything either, as Atlas has decided to populate the game with some absolutely awful awful Mega Man style enemies, taking the most annoying qualities from Mega Man's worst assholes and then tossing them into this game. You've got your enemies that can only be hit when they pop out of a shell for a tenth of a second, your annoying flying enemies that come out of nowhere to knock you off whatever you're standing on, and even large enemies too big to jump over that rush at you with nothing you can do besides take a hit, and always produces a sigh of relief once they're dealt with if they didn't cause too many cheap hits or a sudden death. It's just not a fun game to progress in at any point, and you'd think with how bad the regular enemies are that the bosses would also be on another level of annoying, but surprisingly, most are incredibly easy, requiring nothing more than just running up next to them and jamming on the fire button until they die. Only a couple of bosses offer up any sort of mild strategy, but for the most part, they're thankfully the least of what will make you want to throw your controller in the game. At the end of the day, Widget for the NES does a few cool things that helped it stand out from the crowd. Well, I mean it would've if anyone even cared enough about Widget to play the game in the first place. Transforming into various forms and actually designing stages around making you use them to progress was a nice touch for a game like this. Unfortunately, that cool idea is baked on top of a cake that never had a solid foundation to begin with. All the cool level design and gimmicks won't ever matter if your game just isn't fun to play, and unfortunately, Widget just isn't a very fun game to play. I honestly can't even recommend Widget for the few things it does do right, since there are way too many games out there that ended up doing what Widget tried to do way better. So unless you just can't get enough of early 90s mascot games on the NES, then you'd probably have more fun going outside and actually picking up some trash to try and help the planet than ever playing Widget.